A village is dying of thirst, and only one girl dares to break its most sacred rule. Elara is a lore keeper, a seeker of forgotten truths, and she believes the answers lie hidden within the forbidden Verdant Woods. While her people wither under a relentless sun, she takes a fateful step past the ancient guardian stones. This single act of defiance instantly draws the silent, watchful gaze of the ancient forest itself. By the end of this journey, you will uncover the 27 secrets that can heal a broken world and learn what it truly costs to mend a forgotten pact. What ancient power slumbers in a place everyone has been taught to fear, and what will it demand in return for its aid? What would you be willing to risk to save everything you love? The path beneath her feet was no longer just dirt and decay. A soft, blue luminescence began to glow within the moss, clinging to the roots, flaring gently with each hesitant step she took. It felt like a trail of silent, breathing stars guiding her forward, a path that had been waiting. It led her into a small, sheltered grove, where the air was still and thick with the scent of damp earth and old magic. There, at the very center, stood a petrified sapling, its form twisted into gray stone by some long-forgotten calamity. Yet cradled within its brittle branches was a single, impossible seed, pulsing with a gentle, verdant light. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, not with greed, but with a reverence she did not understand. The moment her skin brushed against the seed, a wave of profound warmth flowed up her arm, settling deep within her chest. A faint, melodic hum filled her ears, a sound that was both a memory and a promise. As she carefully lifted the seed, the entire forest seemed to let out a collective, shuddering sigh. The air grew heavy, charged with a presence that was now undeniably focused on her. She was no longer just an intruder. She had been seen, and she had been chosen. A sharp conflict tore at her. Every instinct born from a lifetime of warnings screamed for her to turn back, to run to her village with this single, radiant hope. But the pull from the seed was a physical force, a magnetic current in her blood that whispered of deeper truths and older pacts. The immediate need of her people warred with the profound calling of the woods. With a resolve that surprised her, Elara made her choice. She tucked the humming seed safely into a small pouch at her belt, its warmth a constant, reassuring pressure against her side. She would not return, not yet. She would trust this strange pull over her own fear. That single decision changed everything. The stakes were no longer about finding water, but about understanding a bond she had just forged. As she turned to venture further in, she glanced back and felt a chill. The path she had just walked was subtly different, the trees seeming to have shifted just enough to obscure her retreat. There was no easy way out now. Her fate was irrevocably tied to the fate of the Verdant Woods. The melodic hum from the seed grew louder, resolving into a clear, guiding tone that pulled her gaze toward a distant, vine-choked ruin, a place that held the first true secret waiting to be unearthed. The vine-choked ruin loomed before her, a skeleton of a forgotten age. Elara's hands worked quickly, pulling away the thick, stubborn curtains of green that shrouded the stonework. Beneath them, she uncovered not a wall, but a figure, a moss-covered statue of a guardian whose features were worn smooth by countless seasons. Its eyes were two hollow, empty sockets that seemed to hold a profound sadness. The pull from the seed at her belt was a palpable thrum now, a direct call to this silent sentinel. With a breath held tight in her chest, she gently pressed the pulsating seed into one of the statue's vacant eyes. Instantly, a network of intricate runes carved across the stone guardian's body flared with a soft, blue-white light. The ancient stone groaned, a deep sound that vibrated up through the soles of her feet. The statue did not fully awaken, but its head tilted with the grating protest of stone on stone, and one arm lifted, its finger extending to point unerringly through the canopy at a specific cluster of stars, just becoming visible in the twilight sky. As Elara followed its gesture, a fleeting image burned itself into her mind, a clear vision of a key, its handle shaped like a perfect, five-pointed star. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only the celestial map and the memory of the key. Around her, the forest was changing. The diurnal sounds were fading, replaced by a new, more secretive chorus of clicks and rustles from the deep shadows. Unseen things moved just beyond the edge of her sight, and the air grew cold. She could seek shelter, huddle in the ruins until dawn, but the Guardian's silent command felt urgent. Trusting her training as a lore keeper, she chose to navigate by the stars, using their cold, constant light as her guide through the encroaching dark. This decision to press on through the night was a deliberate step into the unknown. Every shifting shadow and snapped twig announced the presence of the wood's nocturnal life, creatures of myth and whispers that her village tales had only ever described in fearful tones. Her commitment was no longer a simple quest. It was a pact sealed in starlight and shadow. Following the star path led her to a small, moon-dappled clearing where the very ground felt strange underfoot. The earth was soft and resilient, and with each step, she felt a slow, rhythmic pulse, as if the soil itself was breathing, hiding a secret heart beating just beneath the surface. The ground beneath her feet was breathing. Alara froze, her gaze locked on a patch of soft, dark soil that rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm, as if a great heart beat just beneath the surface. Kneeling, she pushed aside the layer of fallen leaves and began to dig with her bare hands. Her fingers did not find stone or burrowing creature, but instead closed around something smooth and intricately woven. She lifted it from the earth, a living basket crafted from pale, still-growing roots that pulsed with a faint, golden light. Inside rested a single scroll of supple bark. Unrolling it carefully, she saw it was a map of the Verdant Woods, but unlike any chart she had ever seen. The lines were not drawn in ink, but in a tapestry of luminous, shifting spores that swirled and danced across the surface, reacting to the slightest whisper of her breath. Each exhale sent the delicate paths into a chaotic shimmer, blurring landmarks and obscuring directions. To read it, she would have to become as still as the ancient trees around her. Anxiety clawed at her throat, a frantic reminder of her village's desperate thirst and the unseen things moving in the shadows. The more she worried, the faster she breathed, and the more the map dissolved into a meaningless, glowing fog. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember the lessons of her lore keeper training, the meditative techniques for calming a racing mind. She drew a long, slow breath in, held it for a moment, and let it out with deliberate control. The frantic spores settled, the swirling path stilled, and a clear route solidified upon the bark, pointing toward a place labeled in symbols she somehow understood. the Glimmerfall Pool. In that moment of perfect calm, she felt a new kind of attention fall upon her, not the curious gaze of the forest, but something sharper, something observant. She had passed a test, but she had also announced her progress to the deep woods. The map now lay steady in her hands, a clear guide forward, and from the direction it indicated came the faint, alluring sound of water cascading over stone, hidden somewhere within a distant thicket of reeds that seemed to hum a low, welcoming song. The sound of falling water grew from a whisper to a chorus, pulling Elara through the final curtain of humming reeds. Before her, the Glimmerfall Pool cascaded from a mossy ledge, but it was not water in any ordinary sense. It was a waterfall of pure, liquid light, shimmering with a soft silver-gold radiance that cast no shadows, only illumination. A deep, instinctual pull drew her forward, a thirst far greater than the one in her village. Kneeling at the pool's edge, she cupped her hands and drank. The light did not feel wet, but cool and effervescent, flowing down her throat like swallowed starlight. Instantly, her vision shattered. She was no longer in the grove. She was adrift in a sea of time, watching as colossal seeds fell from the heavens like gentle embers, embedding themselves in the raw, new soil. She saw the first trees rise, their bark forming under the direct light of ancient, nameless stars, their roots weaving the very bedrock of the world into a stable whole. This was the Verdant Woods at its moment of birth, a memory held in the light of the pool. When the vision released her, she stumbled back, gasping. The world had not returned to normal. Every leaf around her now whispered with simple, clear intent. A nearby fern expressed a contented drowsiness. The wind carried a complaint about a stubborn rock. The gurgle of the pool itself was a joyous, unending song. She could understand the simple language of the woods, a cacophony of sensations and ancient memory that threatened to drown out her own thoughts. Her head swam, her sense of self beginning to fray at the edges as the collective voice of the forest pressed in. Was she still Alara, or was she becoming just another whisper in this vast, living network? Fighting to anchor herself, she focused on a single presence, a gruff, practical mind snuffling at the base of a nearby oak. A badger, its thoughts a straightforward stream about grubs and secure dens. Using her newfound connection, she did not speak with words, but projected a feeling of need, a question about the path ahead. The badger paused, then sent back a simple, vivid image of a thicket where the thorns were not hostile, but protective. Trusting this animal wisdom over her own overwhelmed senses, she followed the creature. The communion had gifted her a guide, but it had also opened a door within her soul, making her acutely vulnerable to the wood's immense, silent sorrow. The badger led her to a wall of brambles that shivered and then parted, their sharp points curling away like respectful fingers. Beyond them lay a sun-dappled hollow, and standing in perfect, silent rows were dozens of stone figures, their unseeing eyes all turned directly toward her. The stone figures stood in a perfect, silent circle, their unseeing eyes all turned toward her. Each one was unique, carved from a different type of stone and holding a different artifact, a weathered tool, a chipped bowl, a cracked tablet. Their hands were cupped in various positions, some open, some closed, some shaped as if holding something specific. The pull from the seed in her pouch was a direct magnetic force, tugging her toward one particular statue made of a dark, river-smoothed rock. Its hands were cupped together, forming a perfect, five-pointed hollow, an exact match for the shape of the pulsating seed she carried. The air in the hollow was thick and heavy, and she could feel the silent, collective attention of the other 11 statues like a physical pressure. With a deep breath to steady her trembling fingers, Elara took the seed from her pouch and carefully placed it into the waiting stone hands. The moment the seed settled into its cradle, the dark statue stirred. A low, grinding hum emanated from its core as its head tilted down to look at the seed now glowing in its grasp. One stone hand closed over the seed protectively, while the other extended toward her, opening to reveal a small, beautifully carved flute made of pale, polished wood. It smelled unmistakably of petrichor, that clean, electric scent of rain on dry earth. This was not what she had expected. She had hoped for answers, for a way to bring water to her people, not another cryptic object. The other statues remained utterly motionless, their stillness feeling less like patience and more like a withheld verdict. Was this flute a reward for her courage, or was it the next step in a trial she did not fully understand? To refuse it felt like an insult to the woods that had guided her this far. Swallowing her uncertainty, Elara reached out and took the flute. Its surface was warm and smooth against her skin. Trusting the process, she lifted it to her lips and played a single, clear note. The sound was pure and piercing, cutting through the silent grove. The effect was immediate and startling. A small, babbling stream at the edge of the hollow shuddered. Its waters churned and then parted, the pebbled bed rising as the current obediently diverted its course, revealing a dark, submerged archway that led down into the earth. This was no simple instrument. It was a key that commanded the very flow of water, a tool of immense power. Her simple act of playing a note had permanently altered the landscape, proving that every choice she made here, every sound she created, could have monumental and irreversible consequences. From the newly revealed passage, a cool, damp breath of air washed over her, carrying with it a faint, melodic echo that seemed to be a direct and inviting response to the note she had just played. The cool, stagnant water swirled around her ankles as she waded into the submerged archway. With each step, the passage opened wider, the light from the surface fading until she stood at the threshold of a vast, echoing cavern. Here, sound was no longer invisible. Every drip of water from the ceiling, every soft intake of her own breath, bloomed into a physical swirl of color that coiled through the air like living smoke. A chaotic, discordant symphony of shimmering crimsons and jagged yellows clashed around her, the visual noise of the cavern's own restless energy. The melodic echo she had heard now resolved into a clear, guiding hum, a single thread of pure silver light weaving through the tumult. She understood instantly. She had to use the flute to answer it, to weave her own sound into this tapestry and calm the storm. Lifting the petrichor-scented wood to her lips, she played a single, experimental note. A vibrant blue ribbon unfurled from the flute, but it was immediately shredded by a violent burst of orange. The entire cavern groaned in response, a deep, shuddering vibration that sent a fresh surge of water pouring from the walls, the level rising sharply to her knees. Panic was a wrong note here. It would drown her. Her mind raced, discarding complex melodies for something simpler, something foundational. A memory surfaced, fragile and warm, of her grandmother, humming an old village lullaby, a tune meant to soothe frightened children during thunderous nights. It was a melody of safety, of harmony. Closing her eyes against the rising water, she let the memory guide her fingers. She began to play the lullaby, but she adapted it, bending its familiar phrases to harmonize with the cavern's own silver hum. The first few notes trembled, but they held. A soft, verdant green spiraled from the flute, intertwining with the silver thread. She continued, pouring her focus into the song of memory and stillness. The chaotic colors around her began to slow their frantic dance, swirling together like mixed paints. With the final, resolved note, the entire spectrum of light coalesced directly before her, solidifying into a bridge of pure, resonant crystal that arched over the dark water, leading to a deeper chamber. She had not just solved a puzzle, she had learned a fundamental truth of the Verdant Woods. Its deepest secrets were not unlocked by force, but by harmony, and they were intimately tied to the most personal memories she carried. Stepping onto the crystalline bridge, she found herself in a smaller chamber whose walls were not stone, but living wood. The grain itself was in constant, slow motion, flowing and twisting to form intricate, shifting patterns that were unmistakably telling a story. The wood was warm and alive under her fingertips. As Alara traced the flowing grain, it responded to her touch, the patterns swirling and cohering into a breathtaking, moving tapestry. She watched the story of a great schism unfold before her. Once, the ancient forest guardians, beings of pure elemental will, had stood as one, their power woven into the very fabric of the woods. But a shadow fell among them, one guardian, its form depicted as a knot of consuming darkness, grew envious of the collective strength. It believed the power should be claimed, not shared, and in a single, catastrophic act of betrayal, it shattered the central heart of their pact. The image of the fracturing power was agonizingly beautiful, a supernova of green light, splintering into 27 distinct, fading embers scattered to the winds. The Verdant Woods had never been the same since. The secrets she sought were not mere treasures or tools. They were the scattered fragments of a broken promise, and the forest's slow decline, the very thirst plaguing her village, was a direct symptom of this ancient wound. A profound weight settled in her chest, heavier than any stone. Her original quest to find water now felt like trying to mend a severed limb with a single bandage. The need of her people was immediate and real, but it was a single leaf on a dying tree. To truly save her home, she would have to heal the tree itself. The conflict was a sharp, internal ache. Could she ask her family to wait, to suffer longer, while she pursued this vast, seemingly impossible task? But looking at the story of the schism, she understood that bringing back a single cup of water would be a temporary reprieve at best. The land itself was bleeding from a wound made eons ago. With a resolve that felt both terrifying and right, Elara made a new vow. She would not rest until she found all 27 fragments and restored the pact. She would become a mender of the wood's lore. In that moment of absolute commitment, the wooden story wall reacted. The grain stilled, and then the wall itself parted with a soft, sighing creak, the living wood pulling back like a curtain. It revealed not another dark tunnel, but a path of intertwined roots that spiraled gently upward, climbing high into the shadowy canopy. Her gaze followed the path to its end, where a nest of impossible size was woven not from twigs, but from strands of solidified moonlight and pockets of deepest shadow. Something was waiting for her up there, something that had watched this entire story unfold. The climb was a journey into another world, The spiraling roots carried her high above the forest floor, into a canopy where the air thinned and tasted of cold starlight. She stepped into the weaver's nest, a structure that defied all reason. It was woven from solidified beams of moonlight and threads of deepest shadow, a cradle of opposing forces held in a perfect, trembling balance. At its center pulsed the weaver itself, a being of pure, intelligent energy that shifted from a form of brilliant light to one of profound darkness and back again. It had no face, yet she felt its ancient, appraising gaze. A jagged tear marred the nest's side, a wound through which strands of darkness were slowly leaking out, weakening the structure. The weaver did not speak, but a challenge formed directly in her mind, a silent command to mend the rupture, using only the loose threads of moonlight drifting around her. This was not a test of strength, but of profound delicacy. Her village's desperation was a frantic drumbeat in her heart, urging her to hurry, but she remembered the lesson of the breathing map. A single clumsy pull, one thread tugged too hard, could unravel the entire delicate equilibrium of light and shadow, plunging the nest into chaos. She pushed the urgency down, finding the deep, meditative calm she had cultivated before. Her hands, which had trembled when taking the seed, were now steady. She worked with a slow, methodical patience, her movements a silent promise to the watchful entity. Each thread of cool, silvery light was carefully guided into place, each weave a note in a silent song of restoration. She was not just repairing a nest, she was proving her worth as a mender. As the final thread was woven, sealing the tear with a soft, permanent glow, the weaver pulsed with a warmth that felt like approval. A single, radiant shard, like a piece of captured sunrise, condensed from its core and floated into Alara's waiting hand. It was solidified dawn, warm to the touch and humming with the pure, hopeful energy of a new day. This was a tool of creation, a light that could push back the deepest shadows. But the moment her fingers closed around it, she felt a dangerous shift. In the darkness far below, several patches of deep shadow twitched and stilled, their attention now locked onto the new beacon she carried. She had gained a powerful ally, but she had also painted a target on her back. The weaver, now whole and balanced, extended a single beam of light, not as a challenge, but as a guide. It pointed unerringly toward a distant part of the woods where the very air seemed wrong. There, the trees were locked in a stark, silver stillness, trapped in a single moment outside the flow of day and night, a grove where time itself had forgotten how to move. The air in the grove was thick and silver, tasting of metal and forgotten moments. Elara stepped from the living, breathing forest into a place where nothing moved. Leaves hung suspended mid-fall, a beetle was frozen in its climb up a trunk, and the very light was caught in a perpetual, dusty twilight. At the center stood the oldest tree, its bark like wrinkled stone, and within its hollow core pulsed a single, captured droplet of water, the perfect, timeless memory of the last rainfall. The dawn shard in her hand flared in response, its warm light pushing against the oppressive stillness. She understood the risk. Jump, starting time itself could snap her own life forward by years in an instant, or trap her in a repeating loop of this single, silent second. Her village's parched faces flashed in her mind, a desperate anchor in this sea of frozen potential. There was no time for hesitation, only for trust. With a final, steadying breath, She thrust the radiant shard deep into the tree's core. The effect was instantaneous and violent. A thunderclap of release time echoed through the grove. The suspended leaves rustled to the ground all at once. The beetles scurried away, and a torrent of water that was not quite water, but the very essence of a storm, erupted from the tree's heart. It drenched her, a downpour of memory and sensation that soaked into her skin and her soul. In that deluge, knowledge flooded her mind. The specific pressure of a rain-heavy cloud, the angle of the wind required to coax it earthward, the subtle hum in the air that precedes a shower. She had gained the ability to call a small, localized rain, but the cost was immediate and personal. As the last of the temporal energy washed over her, she felt a profound drain, as if a part of her own vitality had been spent to power the grove's awakening. She stumbled, her limbs feeling heavy and old, the price of manipulating time written in the new weariness deep in her bones. The grove, now vibrant and dripping with real water, seemed to gather its renewed energy, and in a final, gentle push, the lingering temporal force propelled her forward. She was carried on a wave of spent magic to the edge of a vast, mist-shrouded marsh, where the dark mud bubbled softly, and every whisper of the reeds seemed to form words that clung to her mind as insistently as the grasping earth would cling to her boots. The mud grasped at her boots with a cold, sucking pull, but the true danger was the whispering. The murmuring mire did not speak in roars or hisses, but in a soft, insidious chorus that coiled directly into her thoughts, using her own voice. "You are too late," it sighed with the gurgle of a nearby bubble. "They are already gone. Your quest is a child's fantasy. The village will curse your name for abandoning them." Each word fed the deep-seated fear that had gnawed at her since she left, the terror that her sacrifice would be for nothing. The path of tangled roots she had been following dissolved into the murk ahead, leaving her stranded. Panic, she knew, would sink her faster than the mud itself. Her hand went to the flute at her belt, its scent of petrichor, a tiny anchor. She remembered the lesson of the Cavern of Echoes. Sound could shape reality here. She could not fight the whispers with silence, but she could overwhelm them with a truer sound. Lifting the flute, she did not play a complex song, but the simple, clear melody her grandmother had hummed while teaching her to read the old lore scrolls, a tune infused with unwavering belief and patient love. The notes formed not as colors, but as visible, resonant steps of solid air, a bridge of memory that hovered just above the treacherous bog. To walk it, she had to feed it. She poured every ounce of her focus into the memory of her grandmother's hands guiding hers, of the firm, gentle voice saying, "You see the patterns others miss, Alara. That is your gift." The mud's lies raged around her, but they could not penetrate the shield of that singular, positive truth. With each step on the shimmering bridge of sound, the whispers directly beneath her faltered and fell silent, unable to argue against such a concrete piece of her past. Where her final footfall touched solid ground on the far side, the mud itself stilled, and from that placid spot, a lotus flower of pure white unfurled with impossible speed. Its petals were not soft, but crisp and cool, and etched upon their inner surfaces was a map of constellations, not as they appeared in the sky, but as they would look reflected upon the surface of a perfectly still lake at midnight. Plucking the flower, she felt the last of the mire's doubt cling to her like a chill fog, a reminder that her own mind was now a battlefield. But the Star Map Lotus was a clear command, its celestial directions pulling her gaze toward a body of water visible through the trees. A lake so profoundly calm, it did not mirror the sky above, but something far more wondrous and complex. The lake was a perfect, dark mirror, holding not the sky, but the entire forest in its embrace. Every leaf, every root, every creature was reflected in impossible detail, a tapestry of life woven together in the still water. Elara knelt at its edge, drawn by the Star Map Lotus, and peered into the depths. There, among the interwoven reflections of trees and sky, was her own face. But as she stared, the image shifted. It was not a mere reflection. It was a separate self, looking back at her with ancient, knowing eyes. The water did not feel wet as she reached in, her fingers closing not around a phantom, but around a cool, solid object. She drew her hand back, holding a delicate silver locket. It clicked open in her palm, revealing not a portrait, but a single, dormant seed that pulsed once with a light that felt like recognition. This was a seed of self-awareness, and the moment it touched her skin, her vision fractured. For a single, terrifying heartbeat, she could see the hidden hearts of everything around her. The forest's ancient sorrow was a deep, purple bruise. The playful curiosity of a nearby squirrel was a spark of bright gold, and her own soul was laid bare, a swirling storm of noble green purpose, tangled with gray threads of pride and the stark, white fear that she was doing this not just for her village, but to prove she was right, to be the hero. The vision widened, and she saw flickers of potential futures, brief glimpses of betrayal from allies not yet met, of selfish choices she herself might make if pushed to the brink. The locket offered a terrible gift, the power to see the truth in any heart, including her own. It promised protection from deception, but at the cost of seeing the world only through a lens of suspicion and flaw. Her mission teetered on the edge of a knife. How could she trust anyone, or even herself, knowing what darkness might lie beneath the surface? To walk this path, looking only for betrayal, would be to become like the very guardian who shattered the pact. With a resolve that felt like tearing a part of herself away, she snapped the locket shut. She would not use its power. She would choose to trust the wisdom the woods had shown her, to believe in the possibility of mending, even with her own imperfect heart. It was a choice for hope over certainty, a fragile and brave step toward true maturity. But that choice, that embrace of beautiful ambiguity, left her utterly exposed to the dangers she had just willingly blinded herself to. As if in response to her decision, the lake's surface rippled. It was not from any wind. Something immense and ancient stirred in the black depths, its movement a silent command that drew her gaze inexorably to the small, lonely island at the lake's very center, where a single, magnificent tree stood in solemn isolation. The dark water was shockingly cold as she swam toward the lonely island. The Heartwood tree stood in solemn grandeur, its bark a tapestry of ages, but one terrible scar marred its trunk, a deep, jagged fissure that seemed to weep a faint, gray light. This was no mere injury. It was the physical echo of the schism itself. The knowledge from the lake and the whispers of the grove told her what must be done. A balm was needed, a salve of profound sympathy. She gathered dew from the Glimmerfall Pool, a drop of liquid light that hummed with primordial memory. She added a single, crisp petal from the Star Map Lotus, its celestial pattern swirling. The final ingredient was the most elusive, a tear born not of her own fear or frustration, but of genuine, selfless sorrow for the wood's ancient pain. How could she cry for a wound she had not caused, for a grief that was not her own? She placed a hand upon the scarred bark and closed her eyes, lowering the last walls around her heart. She let the forest's memory flow into her, not as a story, but as a raw, open nerve. She felt the searing shock of the betrayal, the agony of the fracturing power, and the long, slow ache of isolation that had followed. She felt the thirst of the land as her own thirst, the fading of each creature as a personal loss. Her own quest, her village, her fears, all fell away, and in that moment, there was only the vast, silent mourning of the Verdant Woods. A single, hot tear welled in her eye, pure and untainted by self-pity, and she caught it upon a leaf. As it mingled with the other ingredients, the balm glowed with a soft, restorative gold. Gently, she anointed the scar. The gray light within the fissure brightened, then softened to a healthy green as the bark knitted together with a sound like a deep, relieved sigh. From a branch directly above, a single, perfect fruit swelled into being, its skin shimmering with the colors of dawn and dusk intertwined. The fruit of reconciliation pulsed with the condensed essence of a forgotten peace, a tangible promise of a mended world. But such a potent act of healing could not go unnoticed. As the fruit's sweet, calming fragrance spread through the air, a majestic stag emerged from the tree line. Its coat was the color of twilight, and its antlers seemed to hold captured starlight. It regarded her with ancient, knowing eyes, then bowed its head in a gesture of deep respect, before turning to lead her away from the light of the island, its silent invitation pulling her toward the deepest, most shadow-draped reaches of the woods. The stag moved with a silence that absorbed all sound. Elara followed, her world narrowing to the placement of its hooves on the unseen path. The thickets around them were a solid wall of twisted branches and thorns, yet they sighed open before the stag, only to rustle shut the very moment she passed, their sharp points brushing against her cloak like impatient fingers. To hesitate was to be lost. To stumble was to be sealed inside a living tomb. Her breath hitched in her throat, a scream of frustration and fear she dared not release. Every instinct screamed for a question, a gasp, a plea for understanding, but she swallowed them all, focusing every shred of her will on perfect, silent mimicry. She matched the creature's fluid gait, her own footsteps becoming whispers on the moss, her body an echo of its grace. This was not a journey of distance, but of devotion, a test of whether a human heart could learn the absolute stillness of the ancient woods. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on her chest, but with each successful, silent step, she felt a subtle shift in the air, a granting of permission from the watchful trees. Then, without warning, the stag stepped through a final curtain of willow fronds and simply vanished. The oppressive thickets fell away, and Alara stood alone in a hidden meadow, drenched in an impossible quiet. Here, moonlight did not fall as light, but condensed into solid, luminous sheets that drifted slowly downward like gossamer cloth, settling on the grass. The air hummed with a soft, crystalline energy. Her awe was swiftly tempered by a chilling understanding. The stag was gone, its purpose fulfilled. It had led her to this sacred raw material, but the task was now hers alone. To proceed into the deeper woods, she would need a protection no ordinary cloak could provide. She had to gather the falling light and weave it into a garment, a shield fashioned from the very substance of this silent, holy place. Her fingers moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, guided by a loom she had built from fallen branches and strands of spider silk that shone like captured frost. This was the loom of moonbeams, and her task was to weave the very substance of the silent meadow into a garment. She lifted the flute to her lips, and for each thread of solidified moonlight she laid upon the frame, she had to sing a single, perfect note into the wood. The note would shimmer in the air, a tiny hook of sound that secured the luminous thread in place. It was not a song of joy, but one of intense focus, a quiet melody of binding and becoming. The process was achingly long. Her throat grew raw, her fingers stiff, and the stillness of the meadow began to feel less like peace and more like a prison. With each thread she secured, she felt a subtle shift within herself. The vibrant, sun-drenched memories of the forest, the cheerful chatter of the leaves, and the warm hum of the living soil grew quieter in her mind, as if someone had closed a door on a bright, noisy room. The connection was not severed, but it was muted, dimmed by the cloak of night she was creating. It felt like a personal loss, a small part of her own vitality being traded for the power of shadows and silence. Yet she did not stop. She understood the necessity of the trade. The challenges ahead would not be met with open hands and a trusting heart, not after the visions the Locket had shown her. Stealth and secrecy would be her new weapons. She accepted the growing quiet inside, weaving her resolve into the cloak alongside the moonlight. When the final note was sung and the last thread bound, the completed cloak settled into her hands. It was weightless, cool to the touch, and seemed to drink the light from the air around it. Slipping it over her shoulders was like stepping into a different self. The sounds of her own movements vanished, absorbed by the fabric. When she stood in the shade of a tree, her form blurred and melted into the background, becoming little more than a shifting patch of deeper darkness. She was now a ghost in the woods, a silent observer, but this new power came at a cost. The world felt more distant, the vibrant daytime soul of the forest, now a muffled memory. Her journey had irrevocably shifted from one of discovery to one of covert action. As the hood settled over her hair, a new instinct pulled at her, a cold current in the cloak itself. It drew her gaze toward a deep scar in the landscape, a canyon where the shadows were not an absence of light, but a tangible, thick substance. From that abyss, she could just barely hear them, whispers that did not speak in words, but in the strict, measured patterns of rhyme, hinting at a vault sealed not by a key, but by a verse. The darkness in the canyon was absolute, a thick, suffocating velvet that pressed against her eyes. Elara stood frozen at its edge, the moon, weave cloak useless against a blackness that had no light to drink. Her only guide was sound. A faint, rhythmic dripping to her left marked a potential water source, while a low, grating shuffle somewhere ahead hinted at movement she could not see. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, and the canyon answered. Her footfall did not just echo, it fractured, returning to her as three separate steps from three different directions. This was a place where sound was not just reflected, but twisted. Deeper in, the faint shuffle multiplied into a chorus of scuttling clicks that seemed to circle her, their sources hidden in the impenetrable gloom. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat she was certain the canyon would mock. But then her fingers, trailing along the cold, damp rock wall to her right, found a seam. It was a perfect vertical line, and then a horizontal one, forming the outline of a massive, circular stone door. Carved across its surface was a sequence of runes, and beneath them, a single, incomplete verse, its final line waiting to be spoken. The riddle was a poem about a seed dying in the earth to feed a new tree, a cycle of sacrifice and rebirth. To open the vault, she had to speak the initiating lines with perfect clarity, trusting the deceptive echoes to twist her words into the missing, rhyming conclusion. She took a shaking breath, the sound itself seeming to flee from her lips. The unseen things in the dark crept closer, their shuffling now a hungry, impatient rhythm. She could not afford a whisper, a stutter, or a trace of fear. Closing her eyes, she thought of the Heartwood tree, of the profound resilience she had felt in its scarred bark. She borrowed that strength, letting it fill her voice as she spoke the carved words aloud. My form is broken, lost to soil and rain, yet from my silence, a new song begins again. Her voice rang out, clear and resonant, and the canyon snatched the words. They bounced and overlapped, a chaotic jumble of syllables that made her doubt everything. But then, from the cacophony, the echoes themselves resolved the final, rhyming line, their collective voice a soft, choral whisper, a legacy of growth from transcendent pain. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then, without a single grating sound, the massive stone door swung inward, revealing a chamber that defied the outer darkness. The vault was filled with floating, encapsulated memories, each one a shimmering, self-contained sphere of light. They drifted like benevolent ghosts, some showing scenes of sun-drenched clearings, others of great, council-like gatherings of the ancient guardians. The air hummed with the raw, unfiltered emotion of centuries. Reaching out, she let one particularly bright memory, a sphere that glowed with the fierce white heat of a falling star, drift into her palm. The moment she touched it, the sphere popped. A wave of sensation and knowledge flooded her mind, not as a vision, but as a direct experience. She felt the searing heat of the celestial object as it tore through the atmosphere, and then the gentle, incredible power of the forest itself reaching up, not to destroy it, but to cradle its descent, softening its impact until it came to rest in a meadow now forever changed. The memory imprinted a clear, burning image in her mind, a place where the grass grew in metallic, iridescent swirls around a central, star-born stone. The knowledge of the Meteor Meadow's location was now a lodestar in her thoughts, its pull as undeniable as gravity. The pull of the star-born stone was a compass in her soul, leading her out of the canyon's oppressive silence and into a clearing that defied all logic. This was the Meteor Meadow. The grass did not simply grow, it spiraled in iridescent, metallic whorls of silver and cobalt blue, all radiating from a central point where a shard of pure star metal, darker than midnight, pulsed with a low, magnetic hum. The air crackled with invisible energy, lifting the hairs on her arms and making her moon weave cloak shimmer with a dangerous, building static. Guarding the fragment was a creature of pure geomagnetic force, a shimmering, wolf-like form of coiled lightning and shifting auroral colors that paced in a slow, predatory circle around the stone. She understood instantly. The very cloak that granted her stealth had become a liability here, a capacitor storing the meadow's ambient power. To approach the star metal without being struck down by the guardian, she had to safely earth the charge. Her gaze fell upon the tallest stalks of iron-rich grass at the meadow's edge, their metallic tips trembling in the charged air. The moment her fingertips brushed the grass, a searing, white-hot jolt shot up her arm. It was not a simple shock, but a violent expulsion of accumulated silence and shadow, a painful purification that made her teeth rattle and her muscles clench. For a terrifying second, the energy creature paused its pacing, its head tilting as it sensed the discharge. She held her breath, her body screaming in protest, but she did not pull away. She endured the cleansing agony, prioritizing the map she knew the star metal held over the immediate relief of letting go. As the last of the static bled from her cloak into the earth, the Guardian gave a low, humming growl and resumed its patrol, its aggression momentarily sated. The path was clear. Stepping carefully through the spiraling grass, she reached the star metal shard. The moment her skin made contact with its cool, impossibly dense surface, the world dissolved. A vast, three-dimensional chart of the cosmos burned itself into her mind's eye. She saw the specific, slow-dancing alignment of distant planets, a celestial clockwork that would only click into place once every few centuries. This was not just a map of the sky, it was a timetable. The ritual to begin mending the Great Schism was tied to this non-negotiable astronomical event, a deadline written in starlight. Her quest was no longer a personal journey, but a race against the motion of the heavens themselves. The weight of this new responsibility was immense, but within the brilliant cartography of her thoughts, one feature shone with particular urgency. The celestial map highlighted a nearby mountain, and within it, a system of caves where the air was said to be thick with the palpable substance of forgotten dreams. The air in the cave was heavy with the scent of old earth and something else, something like spun sugar and forgotten lullabies. Elara stepped inside, and the gloom itself seemed to breathe. All around her, dreams drifted like lazy jellyfish, their forms shifting from soft, pastel-colored hopes to jagged, murky fears. They brushed against her skin, leaving behind fleeting sensations, a sudden, unearned joy, or a cold spike of dread. Her task was clear, a directive that felt woven into the very fabric of this place. She had to harvest one of each, a nightmare and a hopeful dream, and weave them into a perfect equilibrium. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a particularly dark, pulsing orb. The moment she touched it, the cavern vanished. She was back in the Murmuring Mire, but this time, the mud was rising over her head, and the whispers were the voices of her own family, cursing her name for abandoning them. The fear was a physical coldness in her veins, a paralyzing certainty that she had already failed. Gasping, she pulled her hand back, the nightmare clinging to her like a shroud. Next, she reached for a beautiful, golden dream. Instantly, a warm contentment washed over her. She saw her village, verdant and thriving, the well overflowing with clear water. A voice, sweet and seductive, whispered that her work was done, that she could rest now, that there was no need to venture further into danger. It was a vision so perfect, it threatened to dissolve her resolve. She remembered the silver locket, the terrible gift of self-awareness she had refused to use. Now, she called upon that hard-won knowledge without needing the object itself. She acknowledged the nightmare's fear, understanding it was born from her own deep love for her people and her terror of failing them. She did not fight it, but she did not let it rule her. She also acknowledged the hopeful dream's tempting complacency, recognizing it as a beautiful but empty fantasy that would prevent the true healing the woods required. She held both truths in her mind, accepting their existence without surrendering to either. With this fragile balance held tight in her heart, she gathered phosphorescent fungi from the cavern walls, their soft blue light a calming anchor. She wove them into a dream catcher, its form simple and strong. Carefully, she placed the two captured dreams within its center. They swirled, a storm of darkness and light, pulling against each other in a violent struggle. She focused all her will on the balance, her breath steady, her own acknowledged fears and hopes acting as the stabilizing weight. With a soft chime that seemed to quiet the entire cavern, the dreams stilled, merging into a single, perfectly calm lens of crystalline clarity. The lens of clarity was cool against her palm. Lifting it to her eye, she peered through it at the cavern wall. What had seemed like solid, unbroken rock now shimmered with a faint, golden tracery, outlining the shape of a tall, narrow door that had been hidden by a powerful illusion. The lens had revealed the next step, but the effort of its creation had hollowed her out. The emotional toll of facing her deepest fears and most desperate hopes left her feeling thin and translucent, as vulnerable as the drifting dreams around her. Beyond the newly revealed door, she could just make out the silhouettes of shelves and a faint, rustling whisper that sounded like pages turning, pages bound not in leather, but in living, breathing bark. The rustling whispers resolved into words as she stepped through the door. She stood in the Sylvan Library, but its walls were not made of wood or stone. They were towering shelves of interwoven, living roots, and the books themselves were pulsing pods of dense moss, their covers shifting patterns like breathing skin. There was no order, no quiet catalog. The entire library was in constant, restless motion, shelves sliding past one another, books swapping places in a silent, chaotic dance. Finding a single volume in this labyrinth was impossible. Then she remembered the fruit of reconciliation, its sweet, calming fragrance, still clinging to her tunic from the island. She closed her eyes, shutting out the visual chaos, and focused on that singular scent of mended peace. She took a step, then another, trusting her nose over her eyes, following the fragrance as it wove a delicate path through the shifting maze. It led her directly to a small, unassuming pot of moss that glowed with a soft, golden light. This was the Index of Secrets. The moment her fingers touched its cover, the library reacted violently. A deep groaning echoed through the chamber as the root shelves began to untwist, the moss books dissolving into puffs of glowing spores that rose like frantic fireflies. The knowledge of ages was returning to the forest, and she was about to lose it all. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic counter rhythm to the dissolving world. She had only seconds. Flipping the book open, her eyes scanned the swirling, luminous text, a vast list of secrets and their locations. There was too much. She could never memorize it all. A choice had to be made, instantly. She focused her entire being on one entry, the culmination of everything, the Ritual of Unification. She burned the steps into her mind, the specific alignment of the gathered secrets, the words of binding, the place of convergence, the amphitheater of the ancients. As the last shelf crumbled into soil, and the last book became a shower of light, the index itself faded in her hands. The final words she saw, glowing like embers before they vanished, were a clear, directional command, pointing her toward the stone circle where the world could be remade. The static knowledge was gone, but the living quest now had its heart and its destination. The stone amphitheater was a perfect circle, carved not by hands, but by time and the roots of the world itself. The air hummed with a latent power that made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. Following the instructions seared into her memory, Alara moved to the stone basins, ringing the central stage. With a reverence that felt both earned and desperately insufficient, she began to place her hard-won artifacts. The seed pulsed as it settled into its cradle. The flute of Petrified found its home. The solidified dawn shard glowed brightly in its designated hollow. With each placement, a corresponding ancient guardian spirit materialized from the very air, their forms shimmering with elemental energy. They took seats of woven light in the amphitheater, and their collective, silent gaze fell upon her. The weight of their judgment was a physical pressure. 12 artifacts rested in their basins. 12 guardians watched her. The other 15 seats remained empty, a stark and terrifying void. Her collection was incomplete. The knowledge from the index was clear. The ritual demanded all 27 fragments of the broken pact. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of failure. She could feel the wood's energy fading around her, a slow, sickly ebb that mirrored the thirst of her village. Waiting was a luxury the world could no longer afford. She made her choice, standing at the center of the stage, surrounded by the silent witnesses of a lost age. She drew a shaky breath and began the Ritual of Unification. She poured her will into the chant, using the tools she possessed to compensate for the missing pieces. She channeled the memory of the Glimmerfall Pool through the Dawn Shard, the harmony of the Echo Cavern through the Flute, the quiet resolve of the Star Map Meadow through the Seed. It was a desperate act of faith, a gamble that her intent could bridge the gaps in the ancient formula. The risk was immense. A flawed ritual could shatter the artifacts, sever the tenuous connections she had built, or unleash a backlash of wild magic that would finish what the schism had started. As her voice rose, weaving her will with the words of power, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble, and then the impossible happened. From the deep woods, the missing secrets answered her call. A forgotten melody drifted from the canopy, solidifying into a chime of pure sound that flew to an empty basin. A patch of shadow detached itself from a distant thicket, flowing into the amphitheater as a sphere of contained night. One by one, the fragments she had not found manifested from the trees, the stones, and the very air, drawn forth by the strength of her conviction and the concentrated power she had already gathered. They were not lost. They had merely been waiting for a call strong enough to summon them home. The whispering stones, the captured echoes, and the bottled starlight converged upon the amphitheater in a single, breathtaking moment. Each of the 15 missing secrets flew to its empty basin, and the circle was finally whole. A profound silence fell, deeper than any she had ever known, as the 27 guardians turned their full attention to her. It was time. Lifting the flute with hands that no longer trembled, Alara began the melody of unification. The first clear note tore from the wood, and the dawn shard at her belt flared in response, a torrent of pure, creative energy surging into her. The power was not a gentle river, but a raging ocean forced through the narrow channel of her mortal frame. It was excruciating. Every nerve screamed in protest. her muscles locking as raw creation, and ancient magic burned through her veins. Her vision blurred, the edges of herself beginning to fray and dissolve into the brilliant, overwhelming light. She was a wick burning too fast, and the flame was consuming her from the inside out. To let go would be to fail, to allow the schism to become permanent. So she poured everything she had left into the song. She channeled the memory of the Glimmerfall Pool's first light, the trust in the badger's simple wisdom, the sorrow she had shared with the Heartwood tree, and the quiet resolve of weaving moonlight. She offered her love for her thirsty village and her reverence for the ancient woods, fusing them into a single, selfless intent. She did not fight the consumption, but embraced it, becoming a perfect, willing conduit for the power that sought to erase her. The pain crested, a white-hot agony that promised oblivion, and in that final second, she held fast, a pillar of harmonious energy, woven from every color and every secret, erupted from the amphitheater's heart, piercing the canopy and painting the sky with the truth of a mended pact. The schism itself, that ancient weeping wound, sealed shut with a sound like a great, final sigh. Then, as suddenly as it had erupted, the pillar softened. It did not vanish, but gently settled over the entire forest like a blanket of living light, seeping into the soil, the bark, and the very air. And from the 27 spirits of the amphitheater, a single word was spoken in perfect, resonant unison, a name that was both a recognition and a blessing. Elara. Their hands were not heavy, but the weight of ages settled into her bones as the 27 guardians laid their palms upon her shoulders. It was not a coronation, but a binding. A title bloomed in her mind, clear and irrevocable, Keeper of the Verdant Pact. In that moment, her soul stretched. She could feel the deep, contented sigh of the forest roots as they drank from a long-denied aquifer, and she simultaneously felt the first, cool drop of rain strike the sun-baked earth of her distant village square. The joy of the woods was her joy, a profound, green contentment, but she also felt the lingering ache of an old scar on a distant tree, and the brief, sharp fear of a mouse caught under a shadow. Her life was no longer her own. It was a thread forever woven into the vast, living tapestry of this place. To accept this was to surrender any hope of a simple homecoming. She could walk back into her village, but she could never again be just Alara, the lore keeper's daughter. She was now a bridge, a living conduit between the human world and the ancient, sentient woods. There was no hesitation in her heart. The girl who had stepped past the guardian stones, seeking only water, was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that a single cup could never quench a world's thirst. She accepted the honor and the burden with a slow, deliberate nod, a silent vow made to the assembled spirits. Her personal journey had ended, but her eternal vigil had just begun. The rain falling on her village was a promise kept, but it was also the first note in a new and endless song of guardianship. The path home was a river of welcoming whispers. Where thorns had once threatened, blossoms now unfurled softly against her cloak. The ancient guardian stones, which had once hummed with a forbidding energy, sensed her approach and slid apart without a sound, clearing a path for the keeper of the Verdant Pact. She stepped from the vibrant green of the woods into the drenched, joyous chaos of her village. People were dancing in the muddy square, their faces turned to the sky, laughing as the steady rain washed away years of dust and despair. The sight was everything she had dreamed of, yet the celebration felt distant, a scene viewed from behind a pane of glass. Then the villagers saw her. The laughter did not stop, but it quieted, shifting into a murmur of awe and uneasy silence. They looked at the woman who had returned from a forbidden place with rain on her heels, her eyes holding a depth and a light that had not been there before. She was their savior, but she was also a stranger, an unknown power walking in a familiar shape. The simple home she had left behind now felt like a story from another life, a role too small for the vast responsibility she now carried. She could have offered them a comforting lie, a tale of a simple quest to a hidden spring. It would have been easier, allowing them to see her as the girl they remembered. But a pact built on secrecy had already shattered this world once. Standing before her family and friends, with the scent of petrichor and ancient magic still clinging to her, she chose the harder truth. She spoke not just of finding water, but of the schism, the scattered secrets, and the 27 guardians. She told them of the cost, of the pain that had forged the rain now blessing their fields, and she explained her new title, a bond that tied her soul irrevocably to the forest. Her words were a plea for a new beginning, not of fear and forbidden borders, but of mutual respect and understanding between the village and the Verdant Woods. To speak so openly was to risk everything, to be seen as touched by madness or possessed by the forest she championed. Alienation was a very real possibility, a chilling isolation in the very community she had crossed the wilderness to save. Yet anything less than complete honesty would plant the seeds of future conflict, dooming both the village and the woods to repeat the cycle of fear and decay. As she finished her story, her plea hanging in the rain-washed air, the very earth at the edge of the village square responded. The soil stirred, and a sapling pushed its way into the world, growing to the height of her shoulder in a single, breathless moment. Its leaves shimmered with the same soft, silver-gold light as the waters of the Glimmerfall Pool, a living, permanent reminder of the bond she had forged. It was not just a symbol, but a promise and a bridge. The new sapling's silver-gold leaves trembled not just with the rain, but with a quiet, eager energy. Elara gathered the village children beneath its branches, their wide eyes reflecting the strange light, while a handful of curious adults lingered at the edge of the circle, their expressions a mix of hope and deep-seated apprehension. She did not begin with grand tales of guardians or schisms. Instead, she asked for silence, and then she taught them how to listen. She showed them how the wind moving through the high canopy was not a single sound, but a conversation. A soft, rustling sigh meant the trees were content. A sharper, clattering sound was a warning of a coming shift in the weather. This was the first secret, the simple language of the leaves, a way to hear the forest's mood as clearly as one might hear a friend's tone of voice. The children learned quickly, their young minds unburdened by generations of fear. They would run to their parents, pointing at the woods and announcing, "The trees are happy today," or "The forest says it will be cold tonight." A subtle but profound shift began. The Verdant Woods was slowly transforming from a forbidden threat into a living, breathing neighbor. But this new understanding was not welcomed by all. The village elders watched from their doorways, their faces etched with skepticism. To them, the old stories of danger were not just tales. They were vital lessons carved from survival. Listening to the woods was an invitation to calamity, a foolish trust in a power that had once let the land wither. They saw Alara not as a savior, but as a disruptor, leading their children down a dangerous and unfamiliar path. Faced with this resistance, Alara made a deliberate choice. She focused her teachings on the children, believing that the roots of fear ran too deep in some of the elders to be easily pulled out. True, lasting change would have to grow with the next generation. She met their suspicion, not with argument, but with patient, consistent lessons under the glowing sapling, proving through small, tangible wonders that the woods meant no harm. The entire cultural piece she was building felt as fragile as a spider's web. Its strength would determine everything. Would the healed pact be nurtured by a new era of understanding, or would it be shattered once more by the same human ignorance that had allowed the first schism to fester? The answer seemed to rest on the small shoulders of the children who now played at the forest's edge without a trace of fear. One of them, a girl with bright, inquisitive eyes, stayed late after a lesson, her small hand resting on the sapling's bark. As the wind stirred the leaves above, her head tilted. She heard something the others had missed, a faint, melodic thread woven into the rustling whisper, a clear and distinct phrase that spoke of a hidden glade where the stones remembered their true names. She ran to Elara, her voice brimming with excitement, to share this new secret, proving that the lore of the Verdant Woods was not a finite list to be completed, but an infinite song, waiting for those who knew how to listen. The final fragment of the schism did not wait in some forgotten vault. It had festered here all along, a lingering shadow of pure bitterness, clinging to the base of the restored Heartwood tree. As Elara approached, the scar she had anointed with her tear began to weep a cold, gray light once more. The shadow did not attack with claws or teeth, but with a far more insidious weapon. It reached into her mind and showed her the truth she feared most. She saw her village, the very people she had saved, tearing down the luminous sapling, their faces twisted with fear and ingratitude. They called her a witch, a traitor who had consorted with monsters. Then the vision shifted, and she saw the Verdant Woods itself, the leaves turning brittle and falling, the Glimmerfall Pool drying to dust, all while the 27 guardians watched with hollow, indifferent eyes. Her every sacrifice, every moment of pain, had been for nothing. The despair was a physical coldness, threatening to freeze her heart and shatter her will. She had no artifact left to wield, no flute to play, no shard of dawn to push back this darkness. The final key was not an object she carried, but a truth she had to become. Drawing on every lesson, every connection forged, she stood her ground. She looked directly into the core of the bitter shadow and spoke, her voice quiet but unshakable, resonating with the authority of her title. I am of both worlds, and I choose life for both. The declaration was not a rejection of either her human heart or her sylvan soul, but a full, final acceptance of the bridge she had become. It was the ultimate answer to the schism's foundational lie of separation and envy. Her words, backed by the weight of every secret recovered and every sacrifice made, struck the shadow like a physical blow. It shuddered, its form unraveling not into nothingness, but into a shower of gentle, golden motes of light that fell upon the Heartwood tree like a benediction. Where they touched, the last trace of the scar vanished completely, the bark sealing over with a seamless, vibrant strength it had not known for eons. The ancient wound was not just closed, it was truly healed, its memory transformed from a source of pain into a source of resilience. The unification was, at last, complete. Her home was a small hut built in the space between worlds, its walls woven from village reeds and living wood from the forest. From her doorway, Elara watched the balanced seasons turn. The memory of the great drought was just that, a memory replaced by gentle rains and sun-drenched days that knew a perfect natural limit. The 27 secrets were no longer locked away in forgotten places. They bloomed in the songs the children sang while tending the glowing sapling, and they lived in the stories the elders now told of the ancient guardians, their voices no longer filled with fear, but with a quiet reverence. Her work was never truly finished, for a bridge must be constantly maintained. Her days were spent listening, her soul attuned to the subtle needs of the woods and the burgeoning hopes of her people. She mediated disputes over land, taught the ways of reading the forest's moods, and ensured that every decision honored the pact. This was not a burden, but a deep and abiding peace. She had become the living heart of a restored balance, a promise made flesh that the Verdant Woods and its human neighbors would thrive together, not in spite of each other, but because of each other. And in the quiet of the evenings, she would smile, knowing that the greatest secret of all was that the lore was infinite. For every secret revealed, a dozen more waited just beyond the next sunrise, not as threats to be feared, but as wonders for future generations to discover with open hearts and listening ears.